In the last video, we started setting up our custom animations for the ad subscription flow. They're looking pretty good, but I think there are a couple of improvements we can make. The progress bar at the top felt a little detached from the cards, and the card animations actually made this flow seem pretty time-consuming, even though it was only a few steps. By adjusting the timing of specific elements and modifying how they speed up and slow down, we can make our animations even more realistic. As we make these improvements, there are a couple of different concepts we'll be looking at. First, we'll be looking at how the timing of our animations affect the overall experience of the app, and we can improve how fast the app feels without even making it any faster. And then we'll look at secondary motion. Secondary motion is how we'll make the progress bar and the cards feel more connected, even though they're entirely separate elements. Asara from UX in Motion calls this parenting. He describes it as the linking of object properties to other object properties. So basically, we'll use similar motion properties on both the progress bar and cards to connect them. All right, let's jump in. Let's quickly review where we left off. I'll press Command P to preview, and then I'll select a service and hit Next. So you can see the cards are moving all the way in from the edge of the screen. They're moving to the left while the labels are moving to the right. The first thing I want to do is adjust how much the cards are moving. One thing that's unique to desktop, if you have elements moving in from the edges of the screen, it can take a long time just because it has so much more distance to travel. So for this, I'm going to use opacity rather than having them move quite so far. We'll give the sense of motion in that direction, but then we'll have them fade out. So we already have those cards in place. I'll go in and select Modal 2, and then I'll drag it back to the center. And then rather than moving it all the way off the screen, I'm just going to move it 80 pixels. So I'll go into the X value and hit plus 80, and then I'll change the opacity to 0. Finally, I want to make sure that that comes in from behind the other modal, so I'll move it in the layers panel as well. And then if I go to the next step, I'll select modal, which is the previous one, pull it back to the center. For this one, we'll do minus 80 for the X value, and then change it to 0. All right, let's jump in the timeline editor and see how that looks. So that's already looking a lot better. One thing that I notice now is it looks like the cards are fading into one another rather than being two completely separate cards. We'll have the first card fade out first, and then we'll have the second card come in rather than having them both happen at the same time. So if we look at the timeline, you can see all of these elements have their own individual bar across the timeline. What I can do is I can take that, select the end of it, and drag it to about halfway. So that makes this first modal fade out twice as fast. And then similarly, I'll go to the beginning of the second modal and drag it to the middle as well. So now our first one fades out and then the second one fades in. And then one more thing we can do to make this look a little faster and a little more realistic is to change the easing curves. The easing curves are basically how fast it speeds up and speeds down. So if we select this little curve next to the artboard labels, you can see it's set to ease both. And that means it'll speed up for a little while and then it'll slow down at the end of the animation. Versus if I select ease in, that means that overall the animation starts slow and then gets faster. Or if you do ease out, it's the opposite. It starts fast and then slows down. There are a couple more that we'll dive into a little later, but for now I'm going to put this back to ease both. And I want to change the easing on the individual cards. So I'll go to the first card. I want that one to start pretty slow and then speed up. So I'll do ease in. And then for the second one, I'll do ease out. So it's a pretty subtle change, but it really makes it look like one consistent transition rather than two separate things happening. And you can also see, even though this whole animation is still 0.7 seconds, which is maybe a little too long, it does feel a lot quicker than when we had it moving in all the way from the edge of the screen. So now that our cards are looking pretty good, let's take a look at the progress bar. With the progress bar, the first thing I'll do is ungroup it so we can edit the label and the actual bar separately. And then I'm also going to rename these. So I'll change the first one to Steps 1 and change the second one to Steps 2. And then in the same way we copied over the cards, I'll copy over the labels as well. I'll move that over 40 pixels and turn the opacity to 0. And then same thing on here. I'll move it over 40 and then turn it into 0. When we preview it, it looks pretty much the same. So first we'll need to remove some of the existing links between these layers. So to figure out which one we need to change, If we look back into this timeline, this second steps 1, it has a filled in dot on both the right and the left, so that means it's linked. Compared to steps 2 just above it, it only has a filled in dot on the right, meaning that that only exists on the first artboard. So I'll disconnect these, and then I'll open up that layer as well and see that the rectangles are connected, and I'll unlink that too. So now that those are unlinked, we can start relinking them. And that's one reason that I renamed them. Not only does it make the auto linking smarter, but it makes manual linking a lot easier. So I'll select steps 1 and steps 1, hit link, and then I'll link the layers inside there as well. Similarly on step 2, link that, and then link the layers inside it. Now if we preview, it's getting closer, but you can see that the steps 2 one is moving in the opposite direction. So one trick, so if we select it and hit back to the first artboard, it will keep the linked layers selected. So we'll just move this over to the right 80 pixels, and I'm just using the arrow keys and shift to move it using increments of 10. Now when we preview it, the motion is going in the right direction for both of them. We'll adjust the timeline like we did for the cards. And we know that these are only moving 40 pixels versus the cards are moving 80 pixels, so we don't need them to take quite as long. We'll also make sure to change the easing so it matches the easing of the cards. So our first one is ease in, and then our second one is ease out. Let's slow it down just a bit to make sure the timing is all right. So you can see the card moves first and then the label moves just after it. So that's a good example of parenting or secondary motion. It almost looks like the card is pushing or pulling the label and really gives folks a better sense of not only the progress they're getting from the progress bar moving, but then the different steps that they're on as well. And then if we go back to full speed and preview the whole animation, it's still that 0.7 seconds, but it looks like it's moving way quicker. And we're really calling out the important elements so people can see the steps that they're on and the progress that they're making. So just one quick note before I wrap this video up. You can see I never really had to reinvent these animations. We started from the completely default prototypes, and then we went in and used the default motion transitions, and now we're customizing those transitions, and they're all built off of one another. So this can be a really powerful way to connect your wireframing and your initial experiments with your high fidelity, more complete prototypes. If you'd like to go in, you can apply some of this to the transitions at the beginning and the end of the ad subscription flow, where the cards come into the screen and then where they drop out.